All right, last organ. And this one is actually not an endocrine organ. All the others have been. So we're going to talk about the kidneys. Okay, and so the kidneys release a couple of important hormones as it relates to exercise. So the first one is renin. Okay, so renin is released when we have low blood pressure. It's released from the kidneys. We're not going to go into all the steps that we did in 220, but know that it ultimately increases blood pressure through the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. Know that renin activates angiotensin II, which will ultimately activate aldosterone, and a bunch of stuff happens. Okay, so with angiotensin II, it causes vasoconstriction, so that'll increase blood pressure, increase thirst, which will increase blood pressure if we act on it, release of aldosterone, which causes us to hold on to salt, which will increase blood pressure, and then release of vasopressin, or antidiuretic hormones, so we hold on to water, which will increase blood pressure. Now this system is activated by the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so this will also happen not just because we have low blood pressure, but if we activate that sympathetic nervous system, the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system will be activated. So during exercise, same thing that we talked about with vasopressin a couple videos ago. Intensity leads to sweating, which leads to fluid loss, which leads to low blood pressure. So we release more renin. Okay, so that's what happens during exercise. We release more renin. The other hormone that's released by the kidney or produced by the kidney is something called erythropoietin, or EPO. We're going to talk about this more at the end of the semester when we're talking about ergogenic aids. Okay, so because the synthetic version is called EPO, okay, cyclists, Lance Armstrong, that sort of thing, have been known to use it. The reason is that if I've got low oxygen content in my blood, the kidneys will release EPO, targets the bone marrow in order to produce more red blood cells. Okay, so then this will help oxygen carrying capacity. Now, obviously, during a single bout of exercise, you're not going to necessarily release EPO and all of a sudden magically have more red blood cells. So this is more of something that takes some time. All right, but we want to think about this in terms of exercise and the plasma volume. So we've talked about how plasma volume changes during exercise because we start to sweat. Okay, well, one of the other things that happens is that proteins leave muscle cells during exercise. And these proteins then go into the plasma. Water likes proteins. It likes salt. It likes proteins. And so what happens is we actually increase our plasma volume as a result of training. Vasopressin increases the plasma volume even more. This, however, can lead to something called hemodilution. Now, to understand hemodilution, we need to remember what hematocrit is. And so hematocrit is just what proportion of your blood, or of someone's blood, is made up of red blood cells. Typically between 40 and 50%. On the higher end for men, on the lower end for women. So what do you think hemodilution is? Well, this is where we have a reduced hematocrit because our plasma volume has been increased. We're not changing the number of red blood cells that are in our body. All we're doing is we're adding water. We're diluting our blood so that there are fewer blood cells per volume of blood. So the problem is our hemoglobin concentration will be reduced. And if you remember the oxygen content equation, that one that's 1.34 times hemoglobin concentration times saturation, well, if my hemoglobin concentration's down, even though I have the same number of red blood cells, there's less hemoglobin, less red blood cells per volume of blood. So that means there's going to be less oxygen per volume of blood. So how do I overcome this? Well, I can increase my cardiac output, so make my heart work harder. Okay, something that can be done, not ideal, but if that's what we have to do, that's what we have to do. So how can we counteract this? Well, time. Okay, so vasopressin and aldosterone change plasma volume. If we increase those, we're going to hold on to water, okay, and which means we'll become hemodiluted. But if our concentrations, our salt concentration is too low, or excuse me, it's too high, or we have a high amount of plasma volume, well then what we can do is we stop releasing vasopressin and or aldosterone and we excrete this excess sodium and excess water. and consequently hematocrit goes back to normal. And so this is something that will happen over relatively short periods of time. Okay, so in the short term, hemodilution is not great, but it's not a huge thing, and it goes back to normal relatively quickly.